Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 11: Mana Consequences and Hope. The reason why Lilith felt a little sad about Xietain's situation was because she had decided to trust and believe in him since she currently had her own problems. However, it could not be said that Lilith felt pain for seeing him like this. They had only known each other for about 2 or 3 hours, and the amount of interaction they had with each other was not much either. Besides, Lilith had seen many things worse than the loss of a family during her lifetime. To her, even the fall of an entire race where tears of blood were shed was not such a strange sight either. Now, she could only hope that his family was safe and had not experienced any accidents. Otherwise, if he fell and did not get up again, his death was a matter of time. This was something Lilith hoped would not happen. Unfortunately, people's fate sometimes turned out to be extremely cruel. The number you wish to reach is out of service or out of battery. Please try again. Bang! Xietain didn't even wait for the message to end when he smashed the cell phone against the wall in front of him, completely destroying it with no way of salvation. Without even waiting for all the parts of his phone to fall to the ground, Xietain grabbed the chair he was sitting on and slammed it with all his might against the floor. The wood broke into countless pieces and splinters flew everywhere. As if he had gone mad, Xietain grabbed everything near him and destroyed it without caring about the quantity of noise he was making or if his attitude could scare the people outside the cafeteria. Now that he could not contact any of his 3 family members, he had assumed the worst. How could he care about other people's fear at this point? After destroying more than 20 chairs and several tables, Xietan's stamina began to drop rapidly due to the misuse of his strength, exhausting him faster than usual. He slumped on the floor, leaning his back against the wall, and covered his face with one hand. Lilith looked at him silently and waited for him to vent all the frustration, sadness, anger, and pain he felt. The cafeteria fell silent and the only sound that could be heard was the sound of thunder coming from outside. The faint distant light that acted as illumination could barely provide a scarce source of heat, practically non-existent in the midst of such a gloomy environment. Xietain did not cry. After venting in an illogical but realistic manner, he simply became silent and motionless. He had once been betrayed by people he trusted from the bottom of his heart in the past. At that time, he had felt as if his world had collapsed before his eyes, and he no longer felt like doing anything. Even leaving his room was a challenge every day. In the midst of all that sadness, pain, and desolation, his family was there for him, just as they had always been, but he hadn't noticed. From that moment on, Xietain had changed drastically. He stopped going out with friends, didn't spend time worrying about having a relationship with a woman, and devoted all his time to studying and working hard to give his family a better life. However, in about 3 hours, everything he had been fighting for many years was gone. His family, the only source of warmth that made him feel comfortable, had probably died. Every time he imagined his father, his mother, or his adopted younger sister crying and asking for help before they died, his blood boiled furiously as if a volcano was about to burst. 20 minutes later, Lilith finally spoke. Xietain, your family is probably still alive. His body shuddered softly, but he did not respond. He stayed silent, longing to hear her next words. Although Xietain did not know how strong Lilith was, even after becoming much more powerful than he was in the past, he felt that a snap of her fingers was more than enough to erase his existence if she really wanted it. Therefore, her words at this moment were very important to him. When the soul record arrives in a new world, the mana that was always in that world but was inactive finally begins to move. Now, imagine you spend 20 years in bed and suddenly you abruptly get up and start running at full speed. What do you think will happen? Xietain raised his head softly and looked at her. In a slightly hoarse voice, he replied, everything would collapse. The muscles can't support the weight of the body, the ligaments can't withstand the pressure, and the heart can't pump enough blood after beating so smoothly for so long. Right. It would all come crashing down. Lilith nodded softly and continued, that is precisely what is happening now. After countless years of silence and tranquility, the mana of this world finally began to move everywhere, causing the world order to fall into a mess. As Lilith explained, Xietain struggled to stand up and looked for a healthy chair to sit on. He kept his senses focused on her, not daring to miss a single word. Humans have a weak body by nature, so most of them failed to withstand the shock of the mana wave, turning into those mutated creatures, stronger and with unlimited stamina fueled by the world's mana, but without any intelligence. On the other hand, animals possessing a more resilient body and plants with superior life expectancy are much more likely to adapt to the mana, evolving and growing to become terrifying creatures. Xietain finally understood many things after listening to Lilith's explanation. From the initial function of this strange entity called Soul Record to the reason why so many humans turned into zombies and why previously harmless insects and animals had suddenly changed so much. At this moment, however, he couldn't care less about all of that. "So, what about my family?" he asked in an apathetic voice. Although Xietan's voice was practically impassive, Lilith, who had seen countless lives throughout her wandering, could notice the waver in his gaze when he asked that question. Obviously, although he was trying to act calm, his heart was in chaos as he tried to cling to any hope. In addition to living beings, there is also the possibility that electronic objects will suffer from the mana wave. Then, it's not impossible that the communication devices would be damaged or the distance reached by the signal would have been infinitely shortened. Lilith pointed out. Xietan's eyes glinted as he listened to her explanation. Indeed, Lilith's words made quite a bit of sense if one carefully observed the illogical world outside the window. Seeing the change in his expression and his eyes regaining their color, Lilith quickly added, "Besides, don't forget that during the chaos your family might have also lost their cell phones or simply didn't have time to pick it up." Xietain finally couldn't help but stand up. His previously dull gaze had flared up once again, burning with hope. Previously, he had been too overwhelmed with emotions, unable to think of even something as small as what Lilith had just mentioned. In fact, it was very plausible that his family simply hadn't had time to pick up their cell phones or they simply broke during their escape. Even if it was all a fleeting hope, Xietain was not willing to let it slip away. He advanced with a big step to the chair where Lilith was sitting and hugged her gently as he said softly, "Thank you." Unconsciously, he couldn't help but be amazed at the exquisite scent of roses that Lilith's body exuded. Her soft dark hair lightly caressed his face as if it were his lover's caress. After experiencing hell and then being ascended back to the heavens, even his first-order blood manipulation could do nothing to calm his heart. With unstable emotions, he simply wasn't thinking with complete rationality. Lilith knew this perfectly well, so she didn't bother to push him away. To her, Xietain was a little boy. On the contrary, she joked, "If you really want to thank me, how about taking me right here?" As if he had received an electroshock, Xietain quickly backed away from her and looked at her suspiciously as he said, "You can forget about it." In fact, if it wasn't for the heat of the moment and the emotions clouding his judgment, Xietain would definitely not dare to approach Lilith. Her whole being was too charming and every action of hers was brimming with seductiveness. Even he, who was usually quite calm, didn't have the slightest confidence in resisting if she really wanted to. "Oh come on, don't be a spoilsport." Lilith pouted extremely cute, which was a great counter to her seductive body. "With this cold weather, I'm sure if we hug each other affectionately our bodies will be happy." Xietain rolled his eyes and was about to respond when the metal door was knocked softly. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 12, Meeting and Plans. Hearing the sound coming from outside, Xietain and Lilith stood in silence for a moment before he walked to the door and opened it without saying a word. Standing on the other side was a female student who, though not a great beauty, was considered quite pretty. However, her expression at the moment was rather haggard and the fear in her eyes made her look quite miserable. The student seemed surprised at the sudden appearance of Xietain, who had opened the door with a bang. She unconsciously looked inside the room and when she saw the mess inside was shocked. The place was a mess with splinters of wood everywhere as if a hurricane had hit there. "Do you need anything?" Xietain asked as he looked at the girl 1 or 2 years younger than him. Sorry." The girl apologized for something that Xietain didn't understand and continued quickly, "Big brother Bai, some of the teachers, big sister Shangguan, big brother Chen, and the rest are about to have a meeting to decide what to do next, therefore they would like you to participate as well." This student's name was Kai Jingyi and before the world changed she was a student of international relations. She was very smart about human relationships and emotions. Now that everything changed, Kai Jingyi was also clear that she would be more likely to survive by following someone powerful. At the same time, it was essential to be careful not to offend anyone, because the rules would not necessarily remain the same as before. Hearing her words, Bai Zemin was silent for a moment before nodding. "All right. Thank you for informing me. I'll be there in a moment." He was not surprised that the girl in front of him knew his name. After all, he had worked. It was only natural that someone would start spreading his name around, especially those people whose lives he had saved. Kai Jingyi quickly excused herself and left. She could sense that the young man's mood before her was not particularly good, so she was worried about saying the wrong word. Before Bai Zemin could say anything, Lilith advised, "Bai Zemin, remember that the world you live in has changed and will no longer be what it once was. Although it might not be so obvious now, since it is only the beginning of a new era, gradually people will change. Be careful of the people around you, or your death might not be caused by a monster or mutated plant." Bai Zemin looked at her silently, pondering her words. After several seconds, he nodded slowly and thanked, "Thank you for your advice. I will remember it." Lilith threw him a flying kiss and gave him a charming smile in response. Bai Zemin didn't dare look at her for too long and quickly closed the door behind him as he walked away in the direction of the basketball court. At his reaction, Lilith giggled softly, causing her ample breasts to sway invitingly. Fortunately or unfortunately, there was no man to witness such a wonderful but at the same time dangerous spectacle. After Bai Zemin's nerves calmed down and the tension he felt on his body due to the constant dangers and seemingly endless battles, he finally paid more attention to the people around him and easily noticed many things on his way to the basketball court. Most of the people, regardless of whether they were male or female, teachers or students, had eyes filled with apprehension and looked at their surroundings with constant vigilance. Some of them even had signs of insanity, clutching their hair tightly and muttering incoherent things before they started laughing out loud as if something funny had happened. Seeing all this, Bai Zemin couldn't help but agree with the advice Lilith had given him before. Unconsciously, he lifted his guard a notch higher, not wanting one of these people to stab him in the back. Bai Zemin had no intention of dying, let alone dying by the hands of another human. As he approached a corner far away from the rest, Bai Zemin saw Shangguan Bing Shui, Chen He, Peng Liang, as well as 4 teachers, 3 men and 1 woman. The woman was Jia Jiao, whom Bai Zemin had rescued earlier. Seeing him approaching, the group of 7 people stopped their conversation and looked at him with different emotions: gratitude, curiosity, indifference, kindness, mistrust, and many other emotions coming from different people. When he finally joined the group, Liang Peng smiled carelessly and greeted him casually, "Yo. Little brother Bai Zemin." "Hey." Bai Zemin greeted him back with a brief nod. Although Liang Peng possessed terrifying strength, his thoughts seemed to be too simple. Now that teachers with the ability to think without being affected by the fear as well as people capable of fighting are here, let's start this meeting. Shangguan Bing Shui did not dawdle and immediately went to the point. She also did not give another glance to Bai Zemin, nor did she say anything about him keeping a room for himself. Currently there were many people sleeping in the same place, and although they were not crowded together, it was definitely not as comfortable as having a private place to themselves. Even Shangguan Bing Shui and the rest had no such benefit. Many people were naturally dissatisfied with him taking such a large place for himself. It was just that no one dared to express it after witnessing his strength or hearing about it. As for Shangguan Bing Shui, she simply didn't care. "Wait a moment." Bai Zemin stopped her before she continued. Shangguan Bing Shui frowned slightly but said nothing and simply looked at him silently, waiting for his next words. "If you want to gather people with the courage to fight and some ability, Vice President Lian Sun should be here too," Bai Zemin pointed out. "Oh?" Shangguan Bing Shui's beautiful blue eyes had a strange glint in them when she heard his words. She looked in the direction of where Lian Sun stood and seeing him smile charmingly at her filled her heart with disgust. "I don't think that's necessary," Shangguan Bing Shui said coldly. Her tone contained a hint of mockery and disdain as she said, "He even hid from me that he could fight those creatures, which means he is a coward. Such a person, instead of helping, will only become a burden in times of need." Bai Zemin simply shrugged his shoulders and did not comment any further. "Then, let's continue." Shangguan Bingshui frowned and explained her concerns. Currently, the storm is quite fierce. As each of us headed in this direction, saving other people in the process, it was inevitable that we and the others would get wet. Indeed. Currently, everyone was shivering with cold and many people were sneezing with signs of possible colds. With their clothes completely wet and the cold weather, the body temperature had plummeted all at once and the arrival of illnesses was only a matter of time. Even Shangguan Bingshui's white dress was soaked and clung tightly to her seductive body. This had attracted the attention of the local men regardless of whether he was a teacher or a student. Even the handsome and kind Chen, he could not help but sneak several glances at her secretly. Shangguan Bingshui continued, at this rate, the arrival of illnesses like influenza and fever is only a matter of time. At this moment, we don't even know exactly the situation of the world outside the university. I tried to communicate with my family, but apparently there is some kind of problem with the signal. Chen He nodded. I also tried to communicate with my family but got no results. Hearing their words, Bai Zemin's eyes lit up imperceptibly. Since they had the same problem, Lilith's words were probably real and, although he didn't know if his family was alive, hope burned fervently. Then, I would like to form different teams to perform different tasks. Shangguan Bingshui finally pointed out her real purpose. One team will be in charge of searching for clothes from the male dormitory and the female dormitory, saving the people who are still alive in the process. Another team will be in charge of going to the university pharmacy in search of cold medicine, fever medicine, and whatever else is possible. Chen He added, in the cafeteria, Bai Zemin found enough food to feed more than 100 people for a week. Even if we add more people, the rations should be able to last about 3 days. That's more than enough time for the army and police to make their move. Hearing his words, almost everyone let out a small sigh of relief. Even if the zombies were many, or even if those strange mutated creatures were powerful, in the face of the power of modern firearms they were nothing to fear. Only Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bingshui had indifferent expressions and kept their own thoughts to themselves. Seeing that no one had anything against her words, Shangguan Bingshui nodded and continued, now we should form teams and divide tasks. The teams should be formed in the best possible way to avoid unnecessary losses. Wait a moment. I'd like to move alone. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 13 New Skill, Stoneheart. So far, Shangguan Bingshui's speech and explanations were extremely logical. It was precisely for this reason that no one had interrupted her until now, and even the teachers only watched from the sidelines without saying anything about it. She was truly worthy of being the student association president of one of the most prestigious universities in the whole country. What no one expected, however, was that a voice would abruptly interrupt. Wait a moment. I'd like to move alone. Everyone's eyes automatically turned to the person who had just spoken with different expressions. Chen He had an expression that looked unsure whether to cry or laugh, Liang Peng looked too stupefied to react, and the teachers had different kinds of thoughts that their expressions gave away. On the other hand, Shangguan Bingshui gave Bai Zemin a slightly weary look and said coldly, You want to go alone? Are you crazy? Bai Zemin remained unperturbed and did not care about the expression of the beautiful woman in front of him. Calmly, he slowly said, Whether I am crazy or not, you need not worry about my mental health, Miss Shangguan. Jia Jiao, Bai Zemin's teacher, could not help but try to persuade him, Student Bai, why don't you consider it a little more? With the strength of the four of you together, you should be fine against anything and the chances of survival would certainly be higher. Bai Zemin shook his head and said nothing more. Obviously, he had already made up his mind. It was a pity that none of these people knew him, otherwise they would know that once Bai Zemin took a decision it was practically impossible to make him change his mind. You're just acting selfishly and risking your life pointlessly. Do as you please. Shangguan Bingshui looked at him coldly. In fact, her gaze was so cold that it seemed to have the capacity to pierce into people's souls and freeze them completely. Then that's what I'll do. Bai Zemin nodded calmly and turned to leave as he said, Considering the current time, I guess this task will be left for another time. Tomorrow you can tell me what my task is. Good night everyone. Without another backward glance, Bai Zemin left and disappeared to the end of the corridor. He seems to be a pretty cold guy, doesn't he? Chen, he scratched his head and said with a forced smile. However, although he looked casual on the outside, inside he was incredibly surprised. Bai Zemin was the first man Chen he had met who was able to remain completely indifferent to Shangguan Bingshui. Even Chen he himself, who was considered an outstanding man by countless people regardless of whether they were men or women, had fallen for her charms even though she never had that intention in the first place. Shangguan Bingshui's heavenly beauty, her icy personality and otherworldly aura coupled with her mysterious family background undoubtedly made her the greatest beauty not only in the university, even in all of Beijing. It was hard to find another woman who could compare to her. Forget it. Let's continue then. Shangguan Bingshui looked at Bai Zemin slowly disappearing back and said coldly before withdrawing her gaze. She simply had good intentions and did not want anyone to die in vain. However, if that man wanted to act alone, she could do nothing about it and could only let him go to die alone. Why do you seem so distant with those people? Lilith questioned when Bai Zemin returned. Even without being present, the group's conversation had been heard clearly by her. Bai Zemin picked up a chair and sat down across from her. As he looked at her, he smiled slightly and remarked, "Who was it that told me to be more careful of the people around me?" Lilith had a strange glint in her eyes. She narrowed her gaze at him and said slowly, No. Although in fact, I did tell you to be careful around other humans from now on. Your attitude towards that group and the rest of the people has been strange to begin with." An idea flashed in her mind and Lilith couldn't help but point out, especially towards that woman named Shangguan Bingshui. Your attitude towards her is cold and distant. Suspicious. Bai Zemin sighed lightly and closed his eyes as a bunch of memories flashed in his memory at lightning speed. Although those memories no longer hurt, the pain of the past could never completely disappear. A person's past was the foundation upon which the present rested and where the future was built. Slowly, he opened his eyes again. At that moment, several green letters flashed across his retina. Pain from the past, caution in the present, defiant towards the future. You have acquired passive skill, Stone Heart. Bai Zemin was taken aback when he read the message that had appeared out of nowhere. How had he suddenly acquired a skill? Seeing him dumbfounded, Lilith frowned slightly and asked in confusion, "Is something wrong?" Bai Zemin immediately snapped out of his daze and quickly shook his head as he said, "Forget it, Lilith. Why don't you tell me more about the skills and about the soul record?" Lilith looked at him deeply before finally sighing lightly, "All right, since you don't want to talk about it. Let me explain a bit about the soul record then." Bai Zemin immediately sat up straight and focused entirely on her, pushing the matter about what had just happened to later. The soul record is an unknown entity that no one has ever come to fully understand. This seemingly formless entity reaches out to different worlds, setting in flux the mana that exists in these worlds, and pushing the different races and species towards the path of evolution. Lilith explained slowly, choosing her words carefully, "As you have already seen for yourself, when defeating enemies an orb of light comes out of their bodies and yours absorbs it." Bai Zemin nodded. In fact, even when he killed zombies those orbs still reached him even if they didn't give him benefits. Those orbs contain soul power within them. The soul record concentrates a small part of the defeated enemy's soul power and grants it to the winner. The defeated one becomes a source of evolutionary power for the victor, pushing the winner beyond. In addition to this, as long as the enemy's soul power is strong enough, the winner will not only get part of their power in the form of stats, there is also the possibility of getting treasure orbs or skill scrolls. That would basically be a fairly general and simple summary of the function of the soul record. As for what its true motive or purpose is, no one knows. Lilith paused and looked at Bai Zemin in silence. If she continued to talk about it, even 1 or 2 years would not be enough to explain everything. Bai Zemin took a few moments to assimilate the information before slowly asking, "Is there another method of acquiring skills other than skill scrolls obtained from different enemies?" "There is." Lilith nodded and explained, "Aside from defeating enemies, you can also acquire different active or passive skills depending on your lived experiences or qualities." Seeing him look at her with clear confusion, Lilith deepened her explanation. For example, a person who practiced martial arts from a young age would awaken a passive melee skill and its level will depend on that person's technique. On the other hand, if a man had problems with his sexual orientation, he would awaken a passive skill that makes him immune to female charms. She smiled playfully at him and pointed out, I know someone like that, so if that happens to you don't worry. I won't discriminate against you. Xietain had finally understood many things that were unclear before. Although there were still many questions in his mind, there was no way he could ask them all together and process all that information at once. Therefore, it was better to go step by step in order not to make mistakes or get confused later on. However, when he heard Lilith's final words, he almost fell to the ground. My sexuality has no problems. You don't need to worry, he said with a grim face. Are you sure about that? Lilith stood up and approached him. She bowed slightly, barely showing a small part of her neckline and almost unnoticeable to the eye. Her rose scent entered Xietan's nostrils, and his eyes couldn't help but be drawn to that small patch of white skin. He swallowed audibly, and his breathing became slightly agitated as he began to lose control over himself. It looks like there's really no problem with your sexuality. Lilith stopped toying with him and returned to her seat before looking at him with a smile that was hard to comprehend. Xietain bristled with embarrassment and stood up. He moved away from her and lay down against the wall in the corner. Seeing him act like that, as if he was a child who was wronged by his parents, Lilith couldn't help but chuckle as she said, Oh, don't be angry. I was just making sure you weren't lying. But Xietain didn't answer her. He focused his attention on the green letters flashing in his retina. Stone Heart, 3rd order passive skill, level 5, it becomes extremely difficult for people not close to you to move your heart and shake your emotions. This effect is especially strong against the opposite sex. As a side effect, your love and affection for those close to you grow exponentially. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 14 Evolution Requirements. Looking at the description of the skill, it would be a lie to say that Xietain was not surprised. However, the surprise was not so much after hearing Lilith's explanation earlier. The soul record clearly creates skills depending on the qualities of each person, further adapting that person to evolve and paving his or her path. Any strength or any personality characteristic of a person was categorized as a skill as long as the trait interfered in any way with the possessor, regardless of whether it was a positive or negative trait. Due to certain past events, Xietan's personality had become very indifferent towards people, and to some extent, he only cared for those close to him. However, he had not reached the point of possessing a stone heart where even a drop of water would find it difficult to enter. Obviously, this strange entity called soul record could also enhance a person's traits and take them to a higher level than normal. Xietain estimated that this could also be one of the side effects of mana. However, from his current point of view, it did not seem to be a very useful skill. It did not contribute strength in any way, nor was it an active skill that would allow him to make use of supernatural powers such as his blood manipulation. After hesitating for several minutes, Xietain asked, Lilith, between an unclassified skill and a first-order skill, which one is better? Lilith, who was silent, was surprised to hear his voice again and even more surprised to hear his question. However, she soon seemed to understand something when she softly exclaimed, Ah. You ask this because of your skill, blood manipulation, and your passive skill, special forces soldier, right? Xietain opened his mouth, wanting to say something. However, the next instant he regretted it and simply said, That's right. Although Lilith had helped him a lot so far, Xietain could not trust her completely. Even if he didn't know how strong Lilith was, at least hiding one or two things from her, especially skills that appeared without warning, temporarily might be better from his point of view. When the trust between them grew, he might tell her about his private issues if she didn't do anything to betray him. For now, it was better to be safe early than sorry later. Skills are separated into 5 levels, from level 1 to level 5, Lilith thought for a moment before slowly explaining. When an unclassified skill reaches the highest level, in other words, level 5, that skill acquires the right and the possibility to evolve into something more powerful. Xietain, focus on your blood manipulation skill for a moment. Xietain quickly did as she told him, and the results showed immediately. A window with many green letters flashed in his retina, displaying a message. Blood manipulation, first order skill, level 5. This skill can evolve to the next level if the following requirements are met. Collect 100 liters of blood from 50 enemies level 5 or higher, 0/100. Collect 10 liters of blood from 5 first-order enemies, 0 out of 10. Collect 1 liter of blood from 1 second-order enemy, 0/1. This is what it says here. Xietain was surprised before he began to describe in detail everything the status window described. Although I was already expecting it, really how horrible. Lilith whispered with a bitter smile after hearing the requirements needed to evolve the skill, blood manipulation. Hearing her words filled with bitterness, Xietan's heart couldn't help but sink when he asked, "Is something wrong? Xietain, your blood manipulation skill is much, much more powerful than you imagine." Lilith took a deep breath before speaking in a serious voice. After defeating an enemy for the first time after the arrival of the soul record, depending on the level, the qualities of the defeated enemy, as well as luck, a skill roll will definitely drop no matter what. From the corner where he was sitting, Xietain stared at her. His eyes from the darkness looked exceptionally bright, a proof of how focused he was currently. The qualities of a normal human, at their maximum, definitely did not exceed 10 stat points before the advent of the soul record. However, due to your high magical power, your body and physical conditions were slightly higher than normal. Lilith revealed, and after thinking for a moment, continued, a normal level 2 monster is generally twice as powerful to a normal person, so unless that person is very lucky or knows and possesses some means to defend themselves, that person will definitely die. Now do you realize how lucky you were to be able to kill that level 5B? She finished with a serious question. Xietain couldn't help but nod unconsciously. If it wasn't because all the circumstances were in his favor, as well as a stroke of luck back then, he definitely couldn't have killed that level 5 big B. Due to the characteristics of the normal B, when evolving the B needed blood to evolve, and you, by defeating such a monster with a significantly lower level, naturally acquired a very strong skill. Lilith said, "Although I know that my blood manipulation is strong, I don't think it's as terrifying as you describe it, no?" Xietain couldn't help but point out. If his skill was as strong as Lilith made it sound, then shouldn't he be invincible? After all, Lilith's tone was truly surprised even now, several hours after seeing the blood manipulation skill scroll. You say that because right now you can only use that skill to do small things without great effect. When your skill starts to evolve. Lilith's eyes lit up with a hint of joy indiscernible to Xietain before continuing, "In my entire life, you are the first person that I know managed to acquire a first-order skill at its peak level. Even the leaders of the various higher existent factions were unable to do such a thing before they got to where they are now." When he heard this, Xietain felt excited and couldn't help but ask while complaining, "Lilith, what is this lower existences and higher existences you've been talking about all this time? To be honest, it's a bit annoying to hear you refer to me as a lower existence all the time." Lilith blinked her 2 beautiful eyes slightly in surprise before shaking her head and saying, "I apologize for that. No offense, it's just habit. I had no bad intentions, nor was it my intention to make fun of you. As for what the higher existences are, you don't need to know it temporarily. For now, just worry about reaching level 25 as quickly as possible." Hearing her sincere apology, Xietain felt much better. At the same time, he couldn't help but think once again that this stone heart skill really didn't seem so useful. Since Lilith didn't say anything else, Xietain also had no intention of asking any more questions temporarily. Instead, he closed his eyes wanting to sleep. However, his mind was filled with thoughts that impeded him from sleeping comfortably. To be completely honest, Xietain longed to rush off to find his family. However, such a thing was too unrealistic given that his family was currently on the other side of the city. Beijing was a very big city, even bigger than some countries in the world. Even in normal times, it took many hours by car to get from the university to his home, not to mention now that the outside world was filled with chaos. God only knew how many roads had been blocked with all kinds of transports, zombies, and other wandering creatures. In the midst of such conditions, even a month of travel was not necessarily enough, considering that he would have to fight countless battles to make his way through. Therefore, Xietain had no choice but to restrain the growing urgency to venture out in search of his family. After all, if he died, nothing would make sense. At the thought of his family, his eyes filled with tears again and he could only barely restrain himself from crying a second time. Baizemin looked at his stone heart skill and couldn't help but inwardly groan, "Damn thing, you're no good with this seductive woman, but you affect my heart now?" As the rain poured down like a torrent and the sound of thunder made the walls of the building tremble softly, exhaustion slowly overcame him, and before he knew it he fell asleep. "I will wait until you trust me, boy," Lilith whispered with a complicated smile as she watched him sleep on the floor. Although she did not know what kind of skill he had acquired, it was impossible for Baizemin, inexperienced and only 20 years old, to easily mislead Lilith, who had experienced countless hardships and met all kinds of people throughout her life. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 15, Going Out Alone. Lilith's explanation of the skills was very helpful to Baizemin. This was because although she had not explicitly told him that a third-order skill was better and more powerful than a first-order skill, he could easily draw conclusions based on what he currently knew and could observe. Apparently, his recently acquired passive skill was a more powerful skill than it appeared at first glance. Although it was temporarily impossible for Baizemin to be sure how powerful the passive stone heart was, considering that it was a third-order skill and at its maximum level, it should not be a useless skill. The problem with passives was that, unless the exact circumstances were present that were necessary for a passive skill to shine and show its brilliance, it was extremely difficult to know whether it was useful or not unless the description of the skill was extremely clear and simple about its function. Because Stone Heart did not seem to have any use against Lilith, Baizemin had gone to sleep thinking that it was a skill without much value in battle or other aspects. After several hours of comforting sleep, Baizemin opened his eyes once again and slowly stood up. Although his stamina was almost full before he went to sleep, the mental fatigue he had accumulated throughout the day was nothing to scoff at. After all, he had experienced a constant up and down of emotions while fighting practically without rest. Sleeping on the floor really isn't the best option, he complained with a bitter smile as he felt his bones creaking one after another. "Good morning." A lovely voice sounded next to him, startling him momentarily. Looking to his right, Baizemin saw the beautiful seductress Lilith sitting on a chair 2 or 3 meters away, looking at him with a smile apparently natural. "Good morning to you too," he replied, a little dazed, and couldn't help but think that sleeping on the floor wasn't so bad if such a beautiful woman greeted him as soon as he opened his eyes. He was about to ask if the higher existences, as she referred to herself, needed to sleep or not when a soft knock on the metal door interrupted his words. Followed by the knock, a gentle and caring voice continued, "Big brother Bai, big sister Shangguan and the rest would like to distribute breakfast." Baizemin recognized the source of the voice easily. It was the same girl who had talked to him yesterday. Apparently, she feared that he was sleeping and that her call had disturbed him since her voice was so low that if it were not for the fact that Baizemin had been constantly evolving he could not have heard at all. Without saying anything, Baizemin opened the door and said slowly, "I understand. You can go and tell Miss Shangguan that she can bring the students now." Kai Jini nodded hurriedly and went to retransmit his words. The cafeteria was big enough for 100 people to eat inside if they squeezed in a little. Because there were not enough tables and chairs as a result of the destruction caused by the zombies and Baizemin yesterday, many students had no choice but to sit on the floor while eating their breakfast with fervor. Most of them had not eaten anything since yesterday afternoon and really felt as if they were going to starve to death at any moment. The atmosphere inside the room was extremely gloomy, and if it weren't for the electric light still being on, many people probably couldn't help but cower in fear. Add this to the rain lashing the woods that covered the windows and the terrifying creatures roaming outside, no one dared to speak too loudly for fear of attracting unwanted attention. Since Baizemin didn't like being around people too much, when everyone went to the cafeteria, he moved to the basketball court and sat quietly while eating a piece of cake. The current situation was bad, to say the least. Not only were they cut off from the outside, but they were also right in the middle of the university campus. Beijing University had approximately 1 to 2 million students in the past and, although they did not all attend classes at the same time as there were 2 rotations, such a large number of students was proof enough to show just how big the campus was. If a person wanted to travel from the center of the campus to the exit, a 30 to 40-minute walk was not unusual. It was for this reason that 90% of the students traveled via bicycle or other transport. However, riding a bicycle in this new world was no different from courting death. Even a normal vehicle was not a good choice. As he ate his meal with a frown, thinking of countless matters, a series of footsteps in his direction momentarily distracted him. Looking towards the source of the sound, Bai Zemin saw the handsome and skillful Chen He, the beautiful and powerful Shangguan Bing Shui, as well as the strong and seemingly simple-minded Liang Peng, walking towards him with varying expressions. "Good morning." Chen He was the first to greet him. Bai Zemin had to admit that with how handsome Chen He was, as well as his dexterity, good demeanor, and kindness, being a magnet for women was only natural. "Good morning to you all as well." Bai Zemin returned the greeting. After taking a last bite of the cake and finishing it in one mouthful, he asked, "Is something wrong?" From Shangguan Bing Shui's slightly frowning expression, Bai Zemin felt that something must have happened for this cold and indifferent woman to show a worried face. Shangguan Bing Shui looked at him for a moment before nodding and explaining, "Actually, there is a problem. Currently, 15 students have a fever and there are another 20 who are in the process of catching a cold. If we don't get medicine soon, things could get more troublesome." Bai Zemin frowned as well when he heard her speak. After spending a whole night with their clothes and body completely wet from the freezing rainwater, getting sick was just natural. It was just that he didn't expect that only one night later, more than 30 people would present problems. If it continued like this, it would be hard for when everyone wanted to leave to take even weaker students than they already were by nature. Although Bai Zemin was indifferent, he was not a bad guy, much less a cruel person. There was no way he would casually let other humans die in the mouth of a mutated dog or a huge mosquito. If he was that kind of person, he wouldn't have rescued more than a dozen people on his way to the gym. After thinking for a moment, he stood up and picked up the sword lying next to him. "What are you going to do?" Chen He asked, dumbfounded. "I said yesterday that I would move by myself." Bai Zemin replied as he arranged his meager belongings. "Going to the male dormitory and then traveling to the female dormitory to save people is a task that a large group like the three of you together can do better than me. In that case, I'll go to the pharmacy to get medicines now." Although the sooner the medicines were obtained the better it would be for everyone, Shangguan Bing Shui couldn't help but remark, "Are you really going alone now? The storm is still raging and dangers lurk everywhere. I still think it's better if we form teams or if we all move together." Although Shangguan Bing Shui didn't particularly like Bai Zemin, she still didn't want him to die just like that. Not only was he a human just like all of them, but he was also brave enough to fight, and his strength was something that could not be ignored either. Precisely for these reasons, she insisted that he should not move alone. From a logical point of view, Shangguan Bing Shui was right. After all, moving alone with such horrible weather, the chaotic world, and countless unknown dangers as well as misinformation, was no different from dancing with the Grim Reaper hand to hand. Bai Zemin naturally knew this as well. He looked at her for a moment before shaking his head and slowly saying, "Miss Shangguan, I know you don't like me. To be honest, I don't like you very much either. Still, I know you mean well, so I thank you for that. However, you don't need to worry about my safety." Bai Zemin walked towards the exit and finished his sentence in a low voice, "At least until I find my family, I have no intentions of dying in the mouth of some dog or any cat." As to whether Shangguan Bing Shui, Chen He, and Peng Lian heard him or not, he neither knew nor cared. The wind hit him fiercely as he opened the metal door leading to the exit, and the rain fell on him like a wild torrent. Only a few seconds were enough for his head and the front of his body to be completely covered in it. Bang! With a loud bang, Bai Zemin closed the door behind him and disappeared into the thick fog. However, with the loud sound of thunder, the sound he had just caused did not attract the attention of any particular creature. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 16, First Life or Death Battle, Part 1. How cold. Bai Zemin shivered fiercely when he felt the cold temperatures of the outside world. Although the interior of the sports center wasn't particularly warm, the building insulated the strong gusts of near-freezing wind and protected the body from the constant fall of water coming from the clouds. While it was true that Bai Zemin's body had gone through many improvements since the day before, the day the world had become a mess, his stamina and health were his two lowest stats so far in regards to the cold. He wasn't much different from a normal person, just slightly above comparatively. while your strength increased exponentially, hardening and boosting the power of your body's muscles. If you want to become more resistant to different environments as well as to prevent possible diseases among other issues, your stamina and health stats are the most important. Lilith explained as she walked beside him. Unlike Xietain, who was already completely soaked beyond salvation, there was a small barrier covering Lilith's body completely, so she was as beautiful and sensual as ever. Not even a single drop of rain had touched her body. "Lilith, can't you cover me too?" he asked with a bit of envy. The water and wind really were too strong. His body temperature had plummeted only after several minutes, and his stamina was drying up much faster than normal as a result of the strong winds. "I'm sorry, but I can't do that." Lilith shook her head with a bitter smile and explained, "To be honest with you, except for giving you some information, it will be better for you if you assume as if I'm not here. Unless someone attacks me directly, I cannot use my power in any way to help anyone or harm anyone in this world, or the soul record will revoke most of my soul power immediately as punishment." The corner of Xietan's mouth twitched several times when he heard it. Although from the beginning he had not expected to receive Lilith's help, hearing her directly say that she could do nothing but act as a source of information still surprised him. "You're basically useless, aren't you?" After so long of being teased and tempted by her, Xietain couldn't help but counterattack, taking advantage of the moment. However, who was Lilith? An existence with countless experiences. She nodded and made a sorrowful face as she said in a regretful voice, "That's right. I'm just a pitiful, useless woman who has nothing else to do but provide information that would sooner or later be discovered by you." "Got it. How about I use my body to redeem myself?" Xietan's face turned pitch black when he heard Lilith's words. With no intention of replying to her, knowing that it would only end in his loss, he advanced and casually decapitated 2 zombies wandering under the storm. The 2 zombies were decapitated with such ease and in 2 extremely fluid movements. It was as if Xietain was venting his powerlessness on them. Seeing the dark expression on his face and seeing how he was clenching his teeth while killing the zombies, Lilith couldn't help but point out, "Oh? Could it be that you have opened your eyes to violence?" With agile movements, and as if he had done this for countless years throughout his life, Xietain claimed the lives of 5 other zombies that had come out of a nearby building as he replied, "That's right. Violence is fun. One day, I'll kick your ass too, Kia." Lilith let out a delighted yell and her face flushed as if she was a woman who knew nothing about life. She looked at Xietain through her long eyelashes and whispered, "Instead of kicking me, I would rather you spank me with your big hands." Xietain, he, who was killing zombies like that as if it was nothing, lost his balance and almost fell to the ground when he heard the words of the seductive woman beside him. In his mind, an extremely depraved scene flashed and he had to shake his head fiercely to bring himself back to reality. Wisely, he decided to stop teasing her and continued moving forward. Seeing him silently admit defeat, Lilith giggled out loud, causing her big assets to show off their beauty and charm to the world. The university pharmacy was located in a westerly direction from where the gymnasium was located. Normally, a 10-minute walk was enough to get there. After all, the pharmacy that contained most of the medicines and healing measures was most needed by people who played sports and were susceptible to injuries during training. But, if a normal person wanted to reach the pharmacy under such environmental conditions and with so many dangers, he or she would definitely die miserably without even knowing what had happened to him or her. Even Xietain did not dare to act rampantly. The fog was so dense that it was difficult for him to see more than 5 meters in front of his eyes, and this was already amazing on its own. A normal person without as many upgrades as Xietain probably couldn't even see their own nose at this moment. While advancing with careful but constant and solid steps, Xietain suddenly felt a strange movement from his left side. Not caring about anything but his own safety, he directly kicked with all his might in that direction. His left leg had turned into a whip-like weapon, his 69 agility points cut the surrounding mist in 2 and his 55 strength points completely blasted out as he felt his leg hit something hard. Roar! The enemy roared in pain and was sent flying several meters away. Although it was only for a split second that the surrounding mist was forced back by his strong and swift movement, Xietain managed to see the silhouette of his enemy before sending it flying, causing it to disappear into the mist again. The enemy turned out to be a cat the size of a leopard. That cry of pain sounded more like a tiger's roar than a cat's meow. Xietain was stupefied. His movement stopped completely, and he concentrated on the movement of the surrounding mist as his eyes were not too useful under such conditions. If it was before he learned the passive skill Special Forces Soldier, Xietain would have already been killed by the earlier attack of the leopard-sized cat. After all, his combat experience was deficient, and losing most of his vision would make it incredibly difficult for him to sense and dodge such a surprise attack. However, now not only could he sense the attack, but instead of dodging, he managed to make a last-second counterattack. The strange huge cat was even faster and more agile than the mantis that Xietain had killed yesterday. Adding to the surrounding mist, he had no way to use his blood manipulation skill since he didn't even know where the enemy was. Unlike animals, humans did not have a particularly strong sense of smell in comparison, and, now that animals had become powerful beasts after evolving, their senses had been amplified countless times more than in the past. Swoosh. Almost 5 minutes after standing in the same place without moving, a practically imperceptible swooshing sound was covered by the sound of the storm. However, Xietain's battle instinct had taken a quantum leap after learning the Special Forces Soldier skill, so such a sound did not manage to escape him. In a split second, 2 blood-red eyes appeared in front of Xietain, and a pair of coldly glowing claws pointed towards his head with the intention of slashing his neck. Swoosh. Boom. A sharp flash shone, followed by a mighty thunderclap that illuminated the surroundings and shook the ground slightly before everything returned to normal. You have acquired the soul power of Great Mutated Cat level 23. Agility plus 17, Stamina plus 12, Magic plus 10, Mana plus 10. You have leveled up and reached level 14. You get plus 2 status points to distribute freely. You have leveled up and reached level 15. You get plus 2 status points to distribute freely. Xietain coldly looked at the body of the level 23 Great Mutated Cat that was cut into 2 parts with a swing of his Xianyuan sword and marveled at the feeling of power. From a certain point of view, this leopard-sized Great Mutated Cat was even more fearsome than the Great Fast Mantis, as its agility was superior and the environment played in its favor. However, Xietain needed only 1 swing of his sword to end with its life. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 17 First Life or Death Battle, Part 2, What Novel? While it was true that the Great Mutated Cat was faster, and the mist, the sound of thunder, as well as the constant rain, blocked Xietain's senses, except for its speed and sharp claws, the terror of this mutated beast could not compare to the Great Fast Mantis level 25. The Great Fast Mantis possessed 2 forelegs that were like 2 huge scythes capable of holding Xietain's Xianyuan sword, which was a rare grade treasure, for a certain period of time. In addition, the battle instincts of the Great Fast Mantis were much greater than those of the Great Mutated Cat. Furthermore, the Xietain at that time was much weaker than the one who fought against the Great Mutated Cat. As if all of the above were not enough, the Great Mutated Cat had been seriously injured by Xietain's earlier kick. After all, the cat was a creature that specialized in agility but whose defense was lacking, so when Xietain's 50-plus strength points came into contact with the beast's weak body, several internal organs probably suffered the consequences, lowering the creature's threat by a considerable margin. After making sure there was no danger nearby, Xietain crouched down and picked up a red orb that had fallen from the monster's body before quickly putting it away in his backpack. Xietain did not delay and continued moving towards his destination. After another 5 minutes in which more than 20 zombies perished by decapitation at Xietain's hands, he finally saw the small building where medicines and other medical-related items were kept. Xietain kicked open the door and a shadow shot out towards him. The shadow's speed was slightly above a normal person before the world changed and would probably be the doom of any other human being. Even an evolved person could fall as the attack was too sudden. However, Xietain was currently 8 times faster than a normal person before the arrival of the apocalypse. His reaction speed had become simply dreadful and his guard was always up, so in the face of the sudden attack he did not panic. Taking a step back, Xietain kicked forward with all his might. His foot struck the shadow's chest. However, surprisingly, the shadow was not sent flying after being hit and only retreated a couple of steps. Xietain was astonished. With his 55 strength points, that previous kick could easily kill a person after being hit in the chest. The shadow was actually a huge zombie. The zombie was over 2 meters tall and its body was surrounded by fat that acted as a protective layer. Its 2 bloodshot eyes glared at Xietain with fury as if it could feel pain and quickly charged towards him. The giant zombie's fist was slow in Xietan's eyes. He took a step to the left at the same time as he kicked the zombie's front foot. The giant zombie, losing its supporting foot and with its forward momentum, fell heavily, creating a small bang when its body hit the ground. Xietain advanced quickly and instead of decapitating the creature, he stabbed with his sword directly into its brain. That way, although blood would flow out of the wound, it would not shoot out like a fountain. You have acquired the soul power of Zombie Wall Breaker level 20. Strength plus 10, Stamina plus 10, Health plus 10. Although Xietain was surprised that he didn't level up even once, his attention was soon drawn to a skill scroll. Health Boost, Unclassified Passive Skill, Level 3. After learning this skill, it permanently increases health by plus 20 points. Oh! This is good. Xietain was excited and quickly decided to learn the skill scroll in his hands. A passive skill that increased stats was no different from obtaining soul power from another living being. Moreover, considering that the boost was of 20 points, not just any insignificant creature would give such an amount of soul power. Xietain couldn't help but wonder if Liangpeng had obtained a similar skill to boost his strength stat. Although he did not believe that his strength was in any way weaker and, in fact, he was confident in surpassing him, it was truly amazing that in such a short time Liangpeng could lift and wield a hammer that clearly weighed over 200 kilograms as if it was nothing. The pharmacy was a multi-story building. However, Xietain had no intention of inspecting the entire building. The first thing he did was to fill his backpack with fever medicine, cold medicine, medicine to relieve stomach pain, even medicine for muscle pain, and some vitamin pills. 10 minutes later, his backpack was filled with boxes containing all kinds of basic but essential medicine for any human being. Next, he found several plastic bags and then began to inspect the shelves one by one. As Xietain searched for gauze, band-aids, alcohol, and other types of first aid utilities, he even kept a syringe and some doses of morphine that could be useful in emergencies. But, suddenly, a wild idea that he had been ignoring until now flashed in his mind. Lilith. Don't tell me. Don't tell me that viruses also evolve with mana. If viruses also evolved, then not only was everything he was currently doing pointless, but countless people would die from now on due to diseases. In fact, it was likely that more deaths would be caused by diseases and not by other savage monsters. Fortunately, Lilith's next words eased his worries. You need not worry. Single-celled organisms such as viruses cannot resist mana and their evolutive process is extremely limited, so the world's mana directly ignores them. Xietain unconsciously let out a sigh of relief. If the case was as he had assumed, then he would have no choice but to find his family quickly and help them evolve so that their bodies would become more resilient. As for the rest of the people, Xietain did not think about it. He did not even notice this fact and acted as if his thoughts were normal. Unknown to him, the effect of the skill he still considered useless was changing his perspective of the world little by little. After filling several bags with all sorts of items needed to provide first aid, Xietain took out the red orb to see what it contained. Piercing glove, normal treasure attacks performed with this weapon allow the user to pierce through the defense of almost any enemy below level 25. When equipped, strength plus 5. This gauntlet was odd in that a 30-centimeter spike protruded from the tip where the knuckles should be by default. Although plus 5 strength points was not as amazing as the increase of other items he had acquired so far, it was free power increase, so Xietain equipped the glove with pleasure. Suddenly the ground began to shake slightly and Xietain quickly realized that this was not caused by the storm. What is that? As he approached a window, the fog seemed to be disappearing in some parts. However, the strangest thing of all was that instead of fog, a dense cloud of vapor was slowly ascending into the sky. Also, as if a giant was slowly advancing, the ground was constantly vibrating and the buildings were shaking lightly. Xietain, as he watched the environmental change outside the window and prepared to leave the building for fear of its collapse, Lilith's serious voice sounded beside him. When Xietain turned around to look at her and, for the first time since he met her, he saw a grave and even a little anxious expression on her face. Lilith looked out the window and warned, "You'd better get ready because this could be your first life and death battle. If you win, you will undoubtedly become stronger. If you lose, then your path can only end here." Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 18: The Cruel Path of Evolution. Since Xietain met Lilith, only about a day had passed. Although it was not a long time, his mind had already formed a small idea of the kind of person she was most of the time: playful, charming, even a little mischievous. As for kind, Xietain restrained himself from thinking about that possibility since he didn't believe Lilith was helping him out of pure kindness. Still, it was undeniable that she had helped him on many occasions by providing him with information that, while he might have discovered on his own after some research, it was also true that time was precious in eras of chaos. However, this was the first time Xietain had seen such a serious expression on her face and, although he was not so sure, there even seemed to be a touch of anxiety in her voice. "I won't die. At least I have no intention of dying yet," Xietain replied as he shook his head. Lilith was a little surprised to realize how calm he sounded when he said those words. She looked at him as he took off his backpack and left the plastic bags containing medicines hidden in a corner, and her eyes couldn't help but glint with a hint of praise and even a small glint of unfamiliar satisfaction. "You know, you really are a weirdo," Lilith pointed out as she walked beside him in the direction of the exit. "You think so?" "Well, I've been told that many times." Xietain shrugged and held on tightly to his sword as his eyes flashed with a hint of resolve. "You really aren't afraid of dying? This time you really might die." She raised an eyebrow and reminded him, "I am afraid to die." "Of course I'm scared." Xietain nodded impatiently and continued, "But what I'm afraid of is not death itself. What I'm afraid of is not being able to see Ming-Chi and my parents again. What I'm scared of is not being able to help them when they need me. But I am not afraid of death. For me, death is no different than eternal sleep, and you know what? I love to sleep." "You." Hearing that he even dared to joke in such a situation, Lilith didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and a look of helplessness shone in her beautiful eyes. "My God." As the heavy rain poured down on his body and lightning lit up the sky quite frequently, Xietain looked at the scene in front of him and his heart squeezed slightly. The dense fog in the surroundings had disappeared and a ring of at least 100 meters around was now visible. However, what surprised Xietain was that in the middle of the building, there was a monster as big as an elephant. This monster had various parts of its body surrounded with yellow flames that danced at high temperatures, which erased the surrounding fog. Its body was about 3.5 meters long and was surrounded by a thick kind of armor that glowed as if it were metal. Its 6 legs were as thick as a door, and it had a powerful horn nearly 2 meters long protruding from its mouth. Since when did elephant beetles get so big and have flames around them? Xietain felt his hair stand on end as he saw the giant insect slowly advancing towards him while looking at him with its 2 eyes filled with murderous intent. "Stop joking." Lilith struck him gently and warned, "That's a monster that has already gone through its first evolution. That is a first-order monster. Besides, as you also realized, that insect already noticed you, so it will chase you no matter how much you run away." Xietain nodded silently as he rushed towards another building nearby. With a heavy stomp, the ground beneath his feet shuddered softly, and using his 70 strength points he jumped over 3 meters with relative ease. Such a feat would be impossible before the advent of the soul record and without the aid of soul power, but with the power of evolution available to all, the rules of the past were no longer written in stone. Upon reaching the top, Xietain observed the large insect covered in flames approaching in his direction. The pressure he felt just from being watched by that pair of red eyes was so immense that he had to resist the urge to turn around and leave. Lilith tried to help him in every possible way so that he could survive and pass this test, so she quickly explained, "Upon reaching level 25, all living beings acquire the ability to choose a job or class. As you advance in order, the power of each living being becomes tremendously higher, and the difference is not as simple as adding 1 plus 1. The difference between level 24 and level 25 is as big as the difference between level 1 and level 24, if not bigger." "An even bigger difference?" Xietain could not help but gasp when he heard this. He was very clear about how big the difference was between the current him and a level 1 person. It was like comparing a small ant to a shark. There was no comparison to begin with. Then what about yesterday's mantis? Xietain quickly asked. In his battle against the great fast mantis, Xietain had been in danger several times, and a single mistake would have cost him his life. However, he never at any time felt such immense pressure as he was feeling right now as he came face to face against the giant elephant beetle. According to what Lilith had just said, the level 25 great fast mantis should already be a creature of the first order as well. But he wanted to know why the difference was so great. To obtain said class and then evolve to become a first-order existence, every living being needs to overcome a test and fulfill a challenge. Until said challenge is not overcome, all soul power received will be stored, and leveling up will not be possible. That mantis you killed yesterday was still just an evolved creature, but it had not yet taken the first true step on the path of evolution. Lilith cleared his doubt quickly. However, that giant beetle is definitely a first-order creature. Those flames around it must be its special skill acquired after successfully obtaining its job. Xietain finally understood everything. He nodded and thanked her before half-closing his eyes towards the incoming creature. The giant elephant beetle was currently less than 20 meters away, and strange roars came out of its mouth as it stared at him intently. The murderous intent exuding from its body was so great that even its own flames seemed to grow stronger. Obviously, this creature could sense the soul power inside Xieain's body and was eager to devour him. Although Xietain was barely level 15, because he had been fighting and defeating enemies of a higher level than him since the beginning, stealing some of their soul power in the process, his own soul power was extremely rich at this moment. If the giant elephant beetle could absorb it, it could definitely evolve even further. However, the giant elephant beetle was not the only one who thought like this. Xietain licked his lips and a flash of wildness flashed in his eyes for a split second before disappearing and hiding under that cold gaze. From the first moment he defeated that big bee, Xietain felt drunk at the pleasant sensation of feeling his body and soul growing stronger. The feeling of his muscles hardening, his ligaments strengthening, his flesh becoming tougher and his brain capacity becoming higher. Xietain could feel it all. Humans were creatures that sought power by instinct. The history written in books was proof of this. Xietain wanted power too. To survive, to live a better life, to protect his loved ones, to not have to bow his head to anyone, and to take revenge on those who dared to hurt his loved ones. Lilith thought he was silent because he was nervous or thinking about his next action. Therefore, she stood there, trying to give all her moral support at least. I wonder. Hearing his voice, she turned her face towards him and was so surprised that she, a higher existence, couldn't help her eyes from widening slightly. A big smile graced his face which, although for someone like Lilith was not particularly attractive, at that moment was very striking. I wonder how much I'll grow after killing this beetle, he exclaimed. The surrounding mana moved at his will and the magical power within his body burst forth completely without holding back as he focused on his enemy only 10 meters away. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 19 A Hard-Fought Battle. What novel? Xieain's body currently had a mana reserve of 134 points and his magic points were equal. Before the soul record showed up on planet Earth, activating the world's mana and displaying each person's status window, it was precisely his magic stat that caught the attention of the beautiful and charming succubus Lilith. Until now, Xietain had never used all of his magical power to the fullest since he never found himself in need of it. However, in the face of the approaching giant elephant beetle, he had no choice but to give his all if he wanted to survive. With a single thought, Xietain spent his 134 mana points immediately and pushed all that mana with his 134 magic points towards the giant beetle. When the mana under his control flowed into the creature's body, Xietain immediately activated his first-order blood manipulation skill. His face turned as pale as a sheet and his whole body felt weak after the abrupt loss of his mana reserve. However, he endured and began to make the blood burn inside the monster while using all his magical power. The results were immediately evident. Roar. A sound similar to that of a wounded beast roaring came from the mouth of the 10-foot elephant beetle. When it was only 5 meters away from being able to attack with its giant horn, its movement stopped and it raised its head to the sky while writhing uncomfortably as if it was suffering the most terrifying pain of all torments. Xieain's blood manipulation skill was indeed powerful, just as Lilith had mentioned earlier. It was just that until now, Xietain had only faced mainly dead creatures that did not feel pain, nor did they know the meaning of the word scared. By controlling his mana to get inside the enemy's body, Xietain could make use of all his magic to activate his blood manipulation. The problem with this was that the cost was too heavy, much heavier than Xietain thought. The elephant beetle writhed in pain and its giant body struck a nearby building. The seemingly sturdy and robust building's foundation couldn't even stand for 5 seconds before collapsing with a loud explosion and raising a cloud of dust. Before the apocalypse, humans had no mana inside their bodies. However, with the intervention of the soul record, Xietan's mana points were especially high. Now that he had used all his mana to execute a powerful attack, he felt as if he had lost all the sugar in his blood and his body felt extremely weak. However, he had no choice but to grit his teeth and hold on. His pale face without a trace of blood looked at his enemy, and a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth when he saw the 3-meter elephant beetle stand up again. Roar! The monster glared at him with murderous intent, and its 2 eyes seemed to spit flames of rage as it headed towards him with somewhat unsteady steps. Its body was stained with blood, and its armor-like shell had small cracks through which boiling blood seeped. When the blood came in contact with the yellow flames on its body, the liquid began to evaporate at astonishing speeds, rising in a gaseous cloud into the sky. Seeing this, Xietain inwardly felt happy not to use external blood attacks, or else he would only be wasting mana. After all, flames could be considered the perfect counter to his blood manipulation skill. The wounded elephant beetle reached the building Xietain was standing on and slammed its horn forward with all its might. Xietan's face changed when he saw the creature's intentions, and he hurriedly jumped off the building to the ground and rolled to the side. Boom! As if a demolition machine had hit it mercilessly, the 3-meter-high building collapsed immediately and soon joined with the building previously demolished by the elephant beetle. Stones of all sizes flew everywhere and, although Xietain had rolled to the side at the first possible moment, he was still hit by a considerably large block of stone. Ugh! His body was sent flying 2 or 3 meters as he grimaced in pain, and a small trail slid silently from the corner of his mouth. If it wasn't for the fact that his muscles were much stronger than in the past, that cement block would have left him half dead if not severely injured. Without giving him time to rest, the elephant beetle turned and rushed in his direction, while the fury in its gaze seemed to want to consume him alive. Although its defenses and attack power were quite high, its internal body was weak like that of any other living being. Xietan's previous attack had damaged its organs, its flesh, and much of its blood disappeared due to the high temperatures of its flames. As a monster that had already passed its first evolution, successfully becoming a first-order monster, the elephant beetle could be considered a small overlord in this area. Now that a weaker creature had injured it to such an extent, it was naturally furious. After seeing what the elephant beetle did to the building with its horn, Xietain did not dare to fight it head-on. Taking advantage of the fact that his speed was superior to that of the wounded creature, Xietain endured the feeling of weakness he felt after the abrupt loss of mana and gritted his teeth fighting against the pain as he ran in search of another building he could quickly climb. One running and turning into different streets while the other relentlessly pursued and crushed everything in its path, Xietain and the elephant beetle sought to end each other's lives in different ways. It was clear to Xietain that he simply could not win in a face-to-face battle against the elephant beetle. All of his body stats were below the creature except for his agility. Therefore, to survive and win, he had to make use of his intelligence. After running mercilessly after its hated enemy for almost 10 minutes, the elephant beetle had demolished more than 7 buildings of different sizes. However, as a consequence, a look of exhaustion flashed in its eyes. The constant loss of blood was something the creature could not bear and, although its flames were a powerful defensive skill, the elephant beetle could not use it to attack and therefore only served to keep its enemies away from its body. However, to keep its skill active at all times, the elephant beetle had to expend too much mana, and after so many powerful attacks, its stamina was also quickly running out. Xietain also noticed the change of pace in the creature's steps and hurriedly jumped towards a nearby building, hoping to end this battle as quickly as possible. His own stamina had dropped by more than half and he had only recovered a bit more than 20 mana points. After reaching the top of the building, Xietain looked up to see the elephant beetle prepare to strike with its powerful horn once again. However, instead of jumping to the side, Xietain jumped with all his might towards the giant beetle. Boom! Another building fell. However, its previous attack had created a big opening in its defenses, and the elephant beetle could not prevent its hated enemy from landing on top of its shell. Xietain had just landed on the mutated insect's upper body when a wave of fire assaulted his lower body at once. It hurts. It foo *king hurts. He couldn't help but scream in pain as his face constricted horribly at the sensation of being burned alive. He felt as if his lower body was suddenly submerged in a pool of burning lava, and such a feeling of pain was driving him crazy. Although his defensive cloak protected his body, from the knees down he had nothing capable of fighting off the elephant beetle's fire. Xietain could feel his legs starting to burn little by little, and the only reason why they had not yet completely caught fire was thanks to the treasure normal velocity boots he was equipped with. However, he could clearly feel the boots melting rapidly without being able to withstand the heat. Gritting his teeth and fighting the urge for his tears to fall involuntarily from the overwhelming pain, Xietain ran at full speed until he reached the creature's neck. The giant elephant beetle's entire body was covered by an extremely hard shell. If Xietain wanted to break through its defenses, he would need a lot of time, and that was what he lacked at the moment, not what he had to spare. However, the junction between the head and the rest of the body, the creature's neck, was not surrounded by that shell. After all, this would limit its natural movements. Xietain raised his sword and slashed fiercely downward, tearing off a large chunk of flesh in the process. Blood splattered everywhere, and fiery steam caused by the struggle between the liquid and the flames surrounded him. The elephant beetle sensed danger of death, and its body began to shake violently as roars of pain escaped from its mouth. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 20 First Order Blazing Beetle. What novel? For safety reasons, Xietain immediately held his breath as the blood evaporated after coming into contact with the heat of the flames. He had no way of knowing if this monster's blood had obtained poisonous attributes of some kind after eating different organisms to evolve to where it was currently. In any case, with his current stamina he could endure several minutes without breathing for several minutes without experiencing any kind of problem. Enduring the overwhelming pain that enveloped the lower part of his body and slowly began to affect the other parts, Xietain raised his sword and fiercely slashed the neck of the huge creature again. Another large chunk of flesh was cut in half, and an even larger wave of blood than the previous one came out of the monster's body. The pain was so great that the giant elephant beetle began to run while roaring in pain. Boom! The huge sturdy body of the elephant beetle hit a building, knocking it down in the process. Several stones of all sizes flew everywhere, and Xietain was hit by several of them. His face constricted even more in pain, and a big stone struck his head, making him feel dizzy. He felt his whole world spinning and had to bite his lips with all his strength to the point of breaking them to fight the drowsiness that had suddenly overwhelmed him. A thick line of blood slid silently from his forehead to his left eye, partially covering his vision. Because the rainwater could not overcome the flames of the elephant beetle, the blood over his left eye accumulated until everything within his left vision range turned crimson red. Using the pain and hatred he felt after being injured to such an extent, Xietain not only did not stop his attacks, on the contrary, he began to slash more and more ferociously. The Xianyuan sword in his hands had become a whirlwind of blades that cut large chunks of flesh per second. The giant elephant beetle was very strong. Its defense was powerful, and its horn was strong enough to knock down minor buildings. However, its mobility was its greatest weakness. With Xietain on its upper body, the giant elephant beetle had no way to reach that area, so it could only do its best to force him down from it. Roar! Like a beast that had gone completely berserk, the mutated beetle began to writhe ferociously as it slammed against every nearby building in sight. Some of these buildings collapsed immediately, while others held firm even after being hit several times. Xietain felt his head spinning, and the weakness his body and mind felt was slowly overwhelming him to the point where even his right eye began to see his surroundings blurred. With his left eyesight practically blocked by the blood dripping from his head and his right eyesight failing due to exhaustion, Xietain had turned into something similar to a machine, with the glove's protruding thorn firmly stuck into the monster's flesh to prevent himself from falling. He slashed with his sword relentlessly, knowing that stopping meant the end of his path. The thought of not falling to his death was the only thing that kept him steady. Both living beings fought for several minutes for their own survival, trying to defeat the other for a higher evolution. The sound of constant explosions, caused by more than 20 buildings collapsing from the giant elephant beetle's mad charge, had defeated the sound of rumbling thunder. The area surrounding the pharmacy had become a dead zone. Crushed zombies with their deformed bodies and countless cement blocks were scattered everywhere. Some of them, with their brains intact, struggled with all their strength, tearing their legs away from the rest of their bodies as they crawled towards the source of the sound. The blood of over 200 zombies, in conjunction with the huge amount of blood lost by the giant monster, had accumulated to the point where even the fierce storm had no way of washing it away as easily as before. After what seemed like an eternity, the wild movements of the elephant beetle stopped and its charge stalled. After the constant loss of blood, after being attacked again and again in such a delicate and deadly area by Xietain, the beast finally lost all its energy and collapsed to the ground. Boom! An explosion similar to that of a collapsing building shook the surrounding ground, and Xietan's body was almost sent flying. However, although he was not sent flying, the price he had to pay was high. A heartbreaking cry of pain slipped out of his mouth as he felt the bones of his left hand cracking. To hold himself steady, Xietain had no choice but to rely on his left hand as well as his piercing glove. However, suffering from such a sudden and abrupt impulse, his wrist that was not so flexible had bent backward. The flames on the giant elephant beetle's body had stopped as the beast could not withstand the energy consumption, and the new pain made Xietan's mind clear for a moment. Making use of the sudden surge of clarity, Xietain wielded his sword and slashed at an even faster speed than before. After cutting more than 50 times, several green letters flashed in his retina. Since the birth of all the chaos after the arrival of the Soul Record, Xietain had never felt so happy to see those strange messages. His mouth opened and closed several times as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he was so exhausted that he did not manage to utter any words. Before the whole world went out of control, Xietain was just a normal student who lived his daily life striving for a better future. Although he was still striving to secure a better future, everything had changed. The bones of his left hand had broken, his left eye had closed due to all the accumulated blood running from his forehead, some of his dark hair had turned crimson red, his feet hurt and burned horribly, and his single open eye could hardly take in any information from the outside world. When had he ever suffered so much? Xietain had once heard in the past that when the pain reached a certain point, the brain turned off those receptors as an automatic defense mechanism so that it was no longer possible to feel pain. Before he was not so sure about this, but now he had confirmed it. Although he was in terrible condition, his mind was so exhausted that he no longer felt any pain. The flames surrounding the elephant beetle's shell were extinguished after its death, and the rain began to fall on the area once again after losing the burning heat that suppressed it. Standing over the 3-plus-meter creature, Xietain could not help but lifted his face to the sky as he felt the raindrops falling on him. Although the battle was already over, his grip on the Xianyuan sword had not loosened, as this sword was the only way he had to feel safe at the moment. Tired, his feet wobbled and he could not help but fall downward. In fact, he was so exhausted that he didn't even notice he was falling to the ground. All he felt was the wind in his surroundings, and that was it. However, fortunately for him, someone caught him just as he was about to hit the ground and make his already horrible condition even worse. An extremely soft body held him gently. The sweet scent of roses, so familiar but at the same time so unfamiliar to him, enveloped his exhausted body, and as if it was the best medicine to relieve his situation, he couldn't help but breathe a bit more as if he was intoxicated. "Good job, Xietain." A soft and innocent voice like that of a baby without impurities reached his ears. However, he could no longer distinguish what was what. That was a wonderful victory. "You can rest now." As if they were the words of his mother and most beloved being, Xietain obediently closed his eyes as exhaustion finally defeated him and a smile rose unconsciously on his face. "You have acquired the soul power of First Order Blazing Beetle level 30. Magic plus 50, mana plus 70, health plus 40, stamina plus 28, strength plus 15. You have leveled up and reached level 16. You get plus 2 status points to distribute freely. You have leveled up and reached level 17. You have leveled up and reached level 18. You have leveled up and reached level 19. You have leveled up and reached level 20. You get plus 2 status points to distribute freely.